China is a country of great historical interest. From places to economic revolutions involved in its history, China holds the historical Great Wall, the Forbidden City, Potala Place, etc. in its own land area. Not only did historical place enriches their history, but also economic revolution worth to be written in the pages of gold. It is the world's most populous country with a population exceeding 1.4 billion. It has an area of 3,705,407 square miles. For the vast amount of land and manpower, China is able to rank itself at the top in economics at present time. But their past wasn't as joyful as the present. They have struggled so much to reach this ground. They struggled to cope with the modern economic race many years earlier, but today's scenery of China is the reason for political movement by the government and the people's willpower. Let's get into the case study to explore more. History of Chinese politics, Mao's era and others. If we analyze communism in China, Mao Zedong would be the first name that will pop into one's mind at first. He is the founder of the People's Republic of China, which he leads as the chairman of the Communist Party of China, established in 1949. On the first day of October, Mao proclaimed the foundation of the People's Republic of China, a Marxist-Leninist single-party state that is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. In the next few years, he expanded his control through the Chinese land reform against the landlords, a campaign to inhibit counter-revolutions, the 3 anti- and 5 anti-campaigns, and through a great victory in the Korea War, which altogether caused the deaths of several million Chinese. From 1953 to 1958, this 5 years Mao played an important role in establishing a planned economy in China, establishing the first constitution of the People's Republic of China, launching the industrialization program, and starting military projects such as the 2 bombs, 1 satellite project, and Project 523. Mao's foreign policy during this period was owned by the Sino-Soviet split, which drove a stake between China and the Soviet Union. In 1955, Mao established the Sufan movement, and 2 years later he established the anti-rightist campaign, in which almost 550,000 people, mostly intellectuals, oppressed. In 1958, he started the Great Leap Forward that arose to constantly transform China's economy from agrarian to industrial, which led to the deadliest famine in history, costing 5 to 55 million people from 1958 to 1962. He damaged more in all our China, such as counter-revolutionary costs to tens of millions of homeless people. During the Mao era, China was greatly involved with other Southeast Asian communist conflicts, such as the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Cambodian Civil War, which invited the Khmer Rouge to power. The government was behind in a huge number of deaths, with estimates ranging from 40 to 80 million victims by persecution, prison labor, starvation, and mass executions. As we can see, Mao's era was a disaster in all cases for China, and communism led them to great defeat in all sectors. Against common knowledge, we take the end of 1976 as the start of post-Mao arrival, and China basically became a market economy by the end of the 90s before it joined the World Trade Organization in 2001. In the new era, the Chinese economy has kept its hype momentum and become more compact with the global economy. As a concern of how China became capitalist instead of socialist, this case study focused mainly on the first 2 decades of reform. Within this period, the progress is divided into 2 parts. The first part of the story is a tale of 2 groups. One was structured by Beijing. Its destination was to revitalize the state sector and save socialism. The other is caused by grassroots initiatives. The state-led regroup came into 2 phases. The first one started at the end of 1976 under Hua Guofeng. Hua was Mao's successor, who reduced his power base after arresting the Gang of Four and ending the Cultural Revolution. Though he was loyal to Mao, he was an economic modernizer. With the full help of Deng Xiaoping and other Chinese leaders, Hua started his economic program of modernization. Importantly, it was stated as an investment-driven program with a huge industry in mind. It is a good example of what economists call big push industrialization. but the program ended in 2 years in early 1979, partly due to its own lackings and also partly due to a change of leadership. At the end of 1978, the Central Committee called a meeting at which Deng Xiaoping and Chen Yin came back in charge, and Hu was no longer in power. Deng Xiaoping is famous in the West. According to Ezra Vogel, Chen Yin is a shadowy figure, but Chen was in charge of China's top official economic affairs. China's first 5-year plan in 1953, he was the architect and a strong believer in central planning. As he grew up a novice in Shanghai before becoming a revolutionary, Chen also saw a limited critical role in the private sector and market under socialism. After Mao's great leap forward in 1958, Chen lost his position. He came back to power alongside Deng at the end of 1978 and was assigned the job of economic reform designing program. Regroup on the edge. There is less doubt in the post-Mao Chinese government followed a series of reforms. But today, with the help of hindsight, we know that the economic armies that were transforming the Chinese economy in the first decade of regrouping were township and village enterprises, private farming, private business in cities, and the special economic zones. None of them started in Beijing. They were reg players handling outside the boundary of socialism. Due to these marginal forces, the Chinese government was happy to leave them alone as long they did not become a threat to the state sector or challenge the party's political power. This created a space for what we called marginal revolutions that brought entrepreneurship and market forces back to China during the first decade of regrouping. Among the 4 marginal revolutions, the special economic zones were the most controversial. They were launched to coup capitalism to save socialism. The idea was to allow them to analyze the market economy, import advanced technology and managerial know-how, sell products to the global markets, create job opportunities, and exciting economic growth. But the experiments were lined to a few enclaves and strictly controlled so that they wouldn't undermine socialism elsewhere. And if the experiments failed, their damage to socialism would be poor. Chinese Communist Party has survived market reform, still monopolized political power, and remained active in the economy has helped to sell the statist account of regrouping. But it was the blessing of marginal revolutions that brought entrepreneurship and market forces back to China during the first decade of regrouping when the Chinese government was busy saving the state sector. The second part of the tale began after Deng Xiaoping's southern tour in 1992. While marginal revolutions brought market forces back to China in the previous decade, regional competition became the main revolutionary force in the second decade, turning China into a market economy. The regional competition was old and existed in the first decade of regrouping, unless it created trade barriers at provincial borders and crumbled the Chinese economy. China launched price reform in 1992, and the next 2 years tax reform began to privatize state enterprises in the middle of the 90s. This reform calculates laid the way for the increase of the common national market that was able to impose the discipline of the market on all economic actors, turning regional competition into a transformative force. In end, we can see a persisting feature of China's market transition in the lack of political liberalization. The fact is, it is not said that the Chinese political system had stood still over the past 35 years. The party made distanced itself from radical ideology. It is no longer communist only in the name. In recent years, China empowered increasingly with the internet to exercise a political voice. Nonetheless, China stayed by the rule of a single political party.